Would you believe if they told you that a statue of Christ moved in the middle of a storm, made the wind cease, and saved an entire village from destruction? Yeah, it really happened, and no one could explain to this day. The most surprising? The miracles didn't stop there. Incurable patients were healed, a coma boy woke up without medical explanation, and even those who thought of giving up his life again smiled. While many doubts the faith in Navidad bar, it became the only certainty. What you will find out here is not in the news nor in history books. They are facts experienced by simple people whose lives have changed forever after a single gesture, kneeling before a Christ with their arms lowered. What if this story had not come to you by chance? Have you ever felt out of your way, like no one heard you? What if I told you that there is a place where silence speaks louder than the shouts of the world? A place where those who come in is restored? It is impossible to hear this story and leave the same, and maybe deep down you need it more than you think. Stay until the end. Because what begins with a storm ends with something much greater, a real chance of rediscovering your faith, your purpose, and perhaps even the cure that your heart has been silently asked for a long time. No one was prepared. The sky, once serene, darkened in the blink of an eye. The wind, fierce as an old roar, swept everything he found ahead, roofs, walls, even the dignity of those who had little. At that moment it didn't matter class, profession, or plans. Everything was swallowed by the same whirlpool. It was as if hell himself had made a scale in that Mexican village named Barra de Navidad. The residents, terrified, shouted for help, but the sound of the storm drowned out everything. Many ran aimlessly. Others tried to save what they could: old photos, wooden saints, pets. Whole families clung to each other, trying not to be taken by the gale. And this is where the detail that few see. At the time of pain, it is not the money in the pocket that matters, but who is on the side to hold your hand. And do you know what is curious? We spend our lives doing plans, home renovation, birthday party, change car, and suddenly all this adds to the brutal force of nature. That storm did not destroy only walls. She took certainty, dragged vanities, and planted in many hearts a question that screams, what if I hadn't woken up today? Life has these, teaches in the Mara. In this whole chaos, there were those who still try to help. A boy named Esteban ran through the streets, alerting neighbors and helping elderly people leave home. He was not a hero, he didn't wear a cover. It was just someone with faith and courage. Sometimes all God needs is someone willing. And perhaps that is why it allows some storms to reveal who has a firm heart. But the strangest was yet to come. Because while the winds howled and the city looked on the brink of collapse, something began to form in the heart of the community. An almost ancestral instinct pushed everyone in the same direction. A search for shelter, by protection, by a place where the invisible is felt. Given the despair, it was not the mayor's house or the city gym that served as a refuge, it was the church. The residents, in an almost automatic gesture, ran towards the stone chapel at the top of the hill. There were no sirens, no official coordinates. Only the hearts screaming for help and the feet following the instinct of those who already understood that when everything collapses, it is in the sacred that we cling to. Inside the small chapel, whole families were huddled. Some cried, others prayed, but everyone had the same look, lost but hopeful. And right there on the main altar was the image of Christ crucified, old, dusty, but intact, his open arms, as if welcoming every soul in suffering. It was there that many felt something different, not afraid, but a presence. Interesting how pain can align people's hearts. Those who were not even spoken before were now holding hands, praying the same Our Father, and the image of Christ, immobile, seemed to observe each one with silent compassion. It was as if, somehow mysterious, she would absorb all the suffering that hovered in the air. And at this moment, something moved within people. Faith. They were not beautiful words that were being said. They were torn words, simple, spoken with the chest. Save us, Lord. It had no liturgy or sermon. It was the pure cry of those who have nowhere to run. And that's where the secret lives. Sometimes the strongest faith is born when we arrive at the bottom of the well, when no one is left to ask for help, only God. And that night of furious winds, thunder, and muffled shouts, A different climate took over the temple. It was as if the time inside ran at another frequency. People didn't know yet, but they were about to witness something that would change everything forever. Suddenly, as if a cold breath invaded the temple, all candles went out at once. It was not the wind, nor the chance. It was as if the time itself had arrested the breath. Heavy silence settled, so dense that even the children stopped crying. And then wide eyes witnessed the impossible. The arms of Christ, once erected on the cross, began to slowly down. There were those who thought it was illusion. Others thought they were going crazy. But what happened in that chapel did not fit the logic. The image of Christ, immobile for decades, was now moving before the eyes of dozens of people. It was not a theater, nor a misinterpreted shadow. It was real. A sign that ripped the natural order of things and plunged everything into the sacred. A lady named Doña Clara fell to his knees with his hands shaking. She whispered, "It's him. It's he who is feeling our pain." The people didn't scream anymore, they didn't cry, they just looked. The environment before despair was taken by an inexplicable type of reverence. It was as if something invisible, powerful, and loving were there, manifesting itself concretely for those who needed the most. And the fall of the arms did not symbolize defeat, but welcome. Christ was no longer in the gesture of condemnation, but in absolute surrender. He descended from the heavens metaphorically to carry the pain of that simple people. It was as if to say, "I am with you." And that, venerable wise, is something that no book teaches. Only those who witness something like this understand what true faith is. From that moment on, no one dared to doubt that they were facing something much larger than a storm. The weather changed, yes, but I don't just talk about the storm out there. Something much deeper was about to happen, something that no time forecast could ever explain. Without warning, the wind ceased. It was not a slow pause, the ones where the rain slowly decreases. It was like turning off a fan. In a second, the roaring chaos. In the other, only the sound of panting breaths filled the church. No one could explain. It was as if an invisible hand had put an end to what seemed an imminent end. The thunder silenced, the sky lightened, the impossible had happened. The people did not celebrate. There were no palms or shouts of joy, just the most absolute silence. A sacred, respectful silence, as one who has just seen God step on the earth. Rude men who barely knew how to pray were on their knees. Children looked at their parents, not understanding, but realizing that something unique had just happened, a moment that words do not reach. There, in that reverence atmosphere, people began to face each other with different eyes. Anyone who once only saw the boring neighbor now saw a brother who also survived the miracle. It was as if the storm had swept not only the tiles, but also the judgments and the hurts. A new perception was born there, of unity, of miracle, something that escaped to human logic. Many fell in tears, but it was no more crying of fear. It was of relief, gratitude, brokenness. It was as if God had given everyone a second chance. And at these times, the human heart becomes more fertile than any earth. It is in these moments that the spirit is ready to understand that there is something beyond the visible, beyond the plan, besides the rational. But the most curious was yet to come, because although the storm outside had ceased, a new movement began inside, a transformation that no one expected. And the Christ, now with fallen arms, was no longer just a sculpture. It had become a symbol, a watershed, a starting point for something that would mess with the soul of those people like never before. Since that day, the image of Christ with fallen arms is no longer just a wooden piece. She turned into a living sign of the divine presence. Residents no longer spoke of the storm as a disaster, but as a watershed. The before and after that day were now marked in collective memory. It was as if a new era had started there. People came to see life in another way. What once seemed small, like a simple family lunch, now earned value. Many who had not put their feet into the church for years came back as if guided by an irresistible force. The younger ones, who once mocking the faith of their grandparents, began to listen carefully to the stories of the Bible. That Christ with his fallen arms had touched something deep. The impact was so great that even the village business changed. Trade began to close at mass time. The neighbors' fights ceased, and the squares filled with people who simply wanted to talk, tell what they felt that day. It is curious how a symbolic gesture can change both daily life. As if the miracle was not only at the event but what it causes later, and it was not only inside the village that Christ came to be commented. Neighboring cities began to hear the reports. Some came out of curiosity, others in search of answers to their own pains. The church became a constant visit point, and with it the feeling of belonging and community has only grown. The Christ of the fallen arms had become the silent guardian of a renewed faith. But what no one imagined was that that image would begin to operate more than emotional transformation. Soon, testimonies of cures and inexplicable events would begin to emerge, and the fame of Christ would surpass the borders of Jalisco. After what happened that night, there were reports of miracles that no one dared to ignore. The first one was with a young woman named Mariana. She was only 32 years old and a brutal diagnosis: terminal stage cancer. 2 small children, a sentence in the exams, and the heart in Krangles. Not knowing what more to do, he knelt before the image of Christ with fallen arms and handed it all over: pain, fear, and life. Mariana did not ask for movie miracles, asked the basics: living enough to see their children grow up. It was not a decorated prayer, but a sincere outburst of a desperate mother. And there, on that simple altar, he felt such a strong peace that it seemed an invisible hug. He left the chapel without healing, but with something different: the certainty that he was not alone in the fight, and that by itself was already a miracle. The following week, the doctors noticed something strange. The tumor had shrunk. Days later, he disappeared completely. They tried to explain with technical terms, but no one could name it. They called spontaneous remission. But for those who knew Mariana's story, that had another name: miracle. Simple as that. A sign that something much bigger was operating in that church. Mariana became a reference. He went to the chapel daily, not to ask, but to thank. Many came to look for her, hear her account, touch her hand. And she always repeated the same thing: it wasn't me, it was him. The image of Christ with fallen arms had become a symbol of healing, not only of the body but of the soul. Faith gained increasingly real contours, and the most surprising thing is that this would not be the only case. Soon, other testimonies began to circulate through the village. One in particular caught the eye, that of a boy in a coma who returned to life after a prayer that broke the boundaries of reason. Another miracle moved the whole community, this time involving a child. Miguel, just 9 years old, had a serious accident by falling from a tree. He hit his head tightly and entered a coma. The doctors said the picture was critical, and that the chances of awakening were minimal. The news spread, and with it, a silent weight slaughtered the hearts of everyone who knew the boy. The mother, Donna Teresa, did not conform. He spent his days at the hospital holding his son's hand and praying. But at dawn, taken by despair, she left the hospital, went to the church, and knelt before the Christ of the fallen arms. It did not take candle, no flowers took the heart into pieces. He cried loudly, as who talks to the sky and requires response. He asked that if he were to take someone to take her, but let Miguel leave. Hours later, something unexpected happened. The nurse entered the room and saw the boy blinking. The first word he said was, "Mom." The hospital got into the hospital. Doctors ran, repeated exams, but found no explanation. It was as if the brain had been restarted by an invisible force, and everyone knew what strength was that. The same one who descended the arms of the cross that night of storm. The story went fast. Donna Teresa returned to church, this time with Miguel next door, walking, smiling, alive. It was there, before the same Christ, that the two embraced, crying in silence. And everyone who saw that understood. It was not just an individual miracle. It was a reminder that when faith is sincere and pain is real, the impossible can happen. And that was not the last. Because the image of Christ seemed to have something else to offer, not only physical cure, but also emotional release. And whoever proved it was a man who had already lost the brightness of life, until he placed himself in the face of that image. Not every pain is visible. Sometimes what kills is not the disease in the body, but the emptiness in the soul. And it was in this abyss that there was Ramon, a 47-year-old man, a father, who could no longer be sensed to wake up. He spent his days locked, avoiding conversations, feeding thoughts that only he knew. Nothing motivated him more, neither the children nor work nor the good memories. Everything had lost the color. One afternoon, at his sister's insistence, he agreed to go to the church. I didn't believe in miracles nor in any image. It was more out of tiredness than by faith. He entered, sat on the last bank, and stared at the Christ with fallen arms. The chapel was empty, only him and the silence. It was in this silence that something happened. Ramon began to cry. It was not a scandalous cry, but that kind of tear that comes when the soul screams. He said nothing, just stayed there. But when he left, he felt something he had not felt for years. Lightness, as if the weight on the shoulders had been carried by someone else. In the following days, he returned to the church. He started talking to the priest. Then he sought medical help. He took medicine, yes, but also resumed his ties with his children. He walked again, smiling, living. Faith was not the only bridge, but it was the first. Ramon became an example, not because it is perfect, but by showing that you can get up even when everything crumbles. He always says, "That image didn't heal me, she woke me up." And that has a lot of value, because not every miracle needs to be spectacular. Sometimes the miracle is simply being able to get out of bed, take a deep breath, and follow. And that, for those who are at war with their own mind, is victory. And his story inspired many to go back to church. The chapel was filled, not only with faithful, but with hope. And what started as a refuge on a stormy night now became a point of light for everyone who needed to meet the way. Over the days, the church is no longer just a stone building. It became a shelter of stories, of tears that became testimonies, of renewed promises. The doors, which previously opened only on Sundays, now remained wide open every day. People from the village, from neighboring cities, and even from distant states, came to the hills to see the Christ who seemed to hear closely. It was beautiful to see. People coming from slippers or in luxurious cars, all with the same goal: thank you. Some carried flowers, some only the open heart. Each with their history, their pain, their gratitude. A farmer who had his harvest saved after a prayer. A lady who was reconciled with her son after years of silence. The altar became a point of reunion between faith and humanity. And even more interesting was what happened around. The square, once forgotten, now had stalls with water, sweetbread, thirds, and images of Christ with his lowered arms. Children ran, the elderly told stories, and even the teenagers who just wanted to know a cell phone were touched by that environment loaded with something different: peace. Simple as that. Peace. The church has a line, but no one complained, because there was not only expected by a mass, but for a moment with the sacred. Some were minutes, others hours. Many reported leaving lighter, as if they had left something heavy on the altar, perhaps a regret, perhaps a fear, but everyone came out different. It was as if Christ, even immovable, continued to hug one by one. And with so many reports, so many people coming, so much visible transformation, the image of Christ with their fallen arms is no longer just a local symbol. She became something bigger, something that carried a message that needed to be remembered by everyone, especially in difficult times when faith seems scarce. Today, that image that once went unnoticed gained a new meaning. The Christ with fallen arms became a living symbol of comfort, not because he won the storm with shouts or thunder, but because he remained firm, welcoming in silence. The lowered arms do not represent weakness, but empathy. It's as if he said, "I know the weight you carry, and I'm here with you." With each new visitor, a new story adds to the altar. Some arrive hurt by loss, others in search of answers that no one else knew how to give. But everyone goes out with something that is not bought: hope. And this is the real miracle. Rekindle what the world tried to erase. The image which speaks nothing teaches more than many speeches, because sometimes all the heart needs is to be heard without judgment. There, before Christ, even those who do not believe in miracles ends up doubting their own doubt. The energy that surrounds the place is not explained, feels. Faith became common language between strangers, and pain became a bridge among those who once walked alone. The reports continue to arrive, but what impresses most is not the number, it is the depth. Each story is a reminder that the sky still responds. Many have tried to understand how a simple wood image has gained so much strength. But perhaps that is exactly that. The Christ of the fallen arms did not come to impress, but to play. And when something touches the spirit, it doesn't matter if it's made of gold or mud, it matters what it arouses. And this image aroused a silent movement of faith, compassion, and real transformation. And even today, when dark clouds threaten to form in the sky, the residents of Barra de Navidad look at that image and remember, no storm is greater than his presence. Because when faith remains, even the impossible can happen. Now that you have known every detail of this story, it's hard to keep believing that everything is just coincidence, isn't it? How many times have you been through storms and thought of giving up, not knowing that maybe the miracle was closer than you thought? The Christ of the fallen arms is not just in a chapel in Mexico. He represents every moment when you were welcomed when no one else understood you. And if you stop now and reflect, is the faith I have asleep? Does the miracle that I hope so much depends on a simple gesture of mine? How to kneel, ask, and trust. How many times have you ignored the signs? Do not wait for a pain to bend you anymore. Make your faith your shelter before the storm comes. Leave a amen in the comments as a sign that you believe, that you are ready to live something new. And tell me, what would you ask if you were before this Christ now? Do you believe that your life can change with a simple act of faith? Answer there. I really want to hear you. Subscribe to the channel, activates the bell so as not to lose the next content, and if you can, leave a super like with any value. This helps a lot to keep this channel alive, spreading stories that feed the soul and strengthen hearts. You are not alone, and maybe, only maybe, today is the day of your miracle.